Okay, class, this is the lesson where we are going to talk about gradients in Illustrator. So here you can see I've got 4 different examples of different types of gradients that we're going to be learning about. So just kind of watch this lesson. It'll just be a few minutes, and then when it's finished, try out some different gradient things. Just kind of try out some things we've talked about. And then when you feel pretty comfortable with it, you can go ahead and start on the gradients assignment, which is going to be to create an emoji. So let's get started. If we look at what I have here, we've got 4 different things going on. We've got this one, which is kind of like a circle, and it makes it almost look like it's round because there's one color on the inside and another color on the outside. This is called a radial gradient. So a gradient is basically anytime you have 2 or more colors kind of blended together to create this sort of like ombre effect. And when it's in this sort of circle pattern, it's called radial. This one on the left here, or on the right, sorry, is a linear gradient because the color goes from one side to the other side, and that's sort of how it changes. So there's 2 different ways right there. Down here on the bottom, we've got a gradient with a lot of different colors, and this one is also linear because like the colors go in lines. And then over here on this side, we have another linear gradient, but this one is a color that fades to nothing. So we're going to talk about how to create all 4 of these different types of gradients, and you'll probably be using some variation of each of these in the assignment that we do. So let's talk about how to control gradients. First thing you need to know is that there are 2 different little gradient panel buttons that look very much exactly the same. So over here on our toolbars, we've got a gradient tool, which the shortcut key for is G. And then over here on the right side, we also have a little gradient palette, which when we pop it open looks something like this. So these 2 things are not the same, but we're going to use both of them when we're working on our gradients. And I will show you how. Okay, so let me just move these off to the side so we don't need them. Okay, first thing first, let me, okay, to get this set up, when you open your gradient palette, which again, if you can't find it, it's under Window and then Gradient. So I'm going to pop that open. It will look probably something like this, except maybe black and white for you instead of green, because I've already chosen some colors. If you want to see all your options, which you are definitely going to need to do, we're going to click on the 4 little bars on the right top corner and say Show Options. And that's going to expand our menu to look something more like this. So when we first get here, it will look like this, probably a black to white gradient. And if you get any of your shape tools and you draw yourself a gradient, it will look, you'll have a black to white linear gradient. This is the default that we have. Now, over here on the gradient tool, on your toolbar, what this does is it allows you to control the direction of your gradient. So for example, right now my gradient is going white on the left to black on the right. If I have my gradient tool, I click that, you'll suddenly see that there's this line going right across the middle. And I can use this gradient tool to draw new lines. You can see like wherever I click and drag, it's just going to draw a line. And the way that I draw this line is going to control the way that my gradient goes. So if I want it to go white at the bottom, black at the top, I'm going to start down at the bottom and draw up to the top, and it will do that. If I want it to go diagonally, I can do that. If I want just a little tiny gradient and then it's black and white on the other sides, I can do that. So it just kind of changes your direction. You can also grab this line once it's drawn and kind of move it, but you can see it will always sort of like snap back onto part of the shape that you've done. If you start drawing outside of your shape, then it will just have this shape filled in with whatever color is on that end of it. So that end I have black. If you just do a little bit, you can just kind of try that out and see. But mostly this is for controlling the direction that you go in, okay? Now, if we want to change this to be a linear gradient, so let me put this back to how it was. Over here in my menu, I'm going to switch it from linear to radial. And now that gives me a circular gradient. And this gradient tool works a little bit differently. What we're going to do is where you start to click, it's going to put the center of the circle, and then how far out you drag it is going to be how far your gradient goes. So you can create kind of like these little tiny spots, or you can make like a really big half circle kind of thing where it fades out like that. So it really is just up to you how you want it to be. Okay, so that's the difference between the gradient tool and the gradient palette. Okay, now I'm going to draw myself a new shape, and I'm going to have this one be linear, so it's a little bit easier to understand what we're doing here. But the same principles apply. Now, how do we get these cool gradients that are different colors? Because who wants to use a black and white gradient all the time? Nobody. Now, on your gradient palette, let's look at our options. Down here, we've got some little paint buckets going on, and this is how you're going to control your color. These little paint buckets are going to be the color options. So you just double click on one of them, and it's going to pop up a little menu, and for you, actually, it will probably look like this. And you're like, what the? I thought we could choose colors. There's one option it might give you to like choose some swatches, and this gives you just like a few colors you can choose from, but we don't want to pick the ones they've already chosen. We want to pick our own. So if it looks like this, in order to see the colors that you need to pick, you're going to click on this little top right corner thing, and then you're going to choose CMYK. This is going to allow you to see all the colors, and we can say, I want to do pink on this end. You can see it changes that little paint bucket to pink. And we can just like click back on the menu, it goes away. We'll double click on this one, and I'll say I want yellow on this part of my gradient, and it changes that little paint bucket to be yellow. So if ever you pop this little paint bucket open and it looks like this, all you have to do is you click on this menu, choose CMYK, and it will allow you to choose some colors. So if we back up here and we look at my shape, you can see that it's a pink to yellow gradient, and it kind of like blends those two colors together in the middle. Now you can also, like this little hexagon that I had, you can add multiple colors. It doesn't have to just be two. If you want to add more colors to your shape, again, we have to make sure it's selected. You're going to come in here and you're going to just click underneath this little color slider, and it will add as many paint buckets as you want, and you can change each one of these paint buckets to be something else. If you want it to be blue or you want it to be green, like you can come in here and make whatever kind of color combo you want to have, and that will just, yeah, you can kind of customize it that way. Put one more in here, red maybe. There we go. Okay, and it will give you some kind of like super wild gradient, okay? If you ever accidentally add these in and you're like, oh, this looks terrible, I don't want those colors, I didn't want a paint bucket anyway, I just accidentally did that. In order to get rid of the paint buckets, all you have to do is you just grab them and you drag them straight down and then drop them, and they'll just disappear for you. Okay? Now, on your gradient, you have some other ways you can control it other than just direction. You can also, on this little slider, there's this little diamond that's in between the two paint buckets. If you move this diamond, it's going to kind of move where the center spot is, and it can be closer or further away from each bucket. So if I move my diamond to the left, you'll notice that my gradient now becomes much more yellow and then just a little bit of pink. If I move it the other way, it's kind of like the opposite effect, right? You can also grab the paint buckets and move them closer themselves. That kind of gives the same sort of effect, except now it's like this is all solid yellow, then it has a little bit of gradient, there's the center point, then there's the pink part. So you can kind of adjust these however you need them to be, but it just allows you to sort of customize how much of which color there is. When you have, if we switch this to radial, it's the same way. Now, let's say I switch this to radial and I'm like, what? No, I wanted the yellow on the inside and the pink on the outside. What you just have to do is there's this little button right here underneath where you choose if it's the fill-in color or the outline color. And this allows you to reverse them, so it swaps their sides and it lets you show, like, okay, now we have the yellow on the inside, the pink is on the outside. Okay, other types of gradients that are interesting, if you look right here, there's a little preview. So here's it's showing I'm working on my fill-in color. If you click on this little thing, it has a few like different options. Now the white black is what we're using. The orange yellow, it's the same as, it's just what we were doing. It just gives you like some pre-made other paint buckets you can choose from. And then we also have one called Fading Sky. This one is cool because what it does is it fades into nothing. So you can see that there's like a checkerboard right here. That means that it's invisible. So we still have two color paint buckets, but it just allows you, if we, let me move this off the white background so we can kind of see it. It sort of like fades out into nothing. It just makes it disappear. If you want to change the color on this one, same thing, you just choose your paint buckets, and you just have to choose whatever color it's going to be, and it will still just fade out for you, okay? That's the fading sky one. We'll actually use this on our emoji assignment in just a little bit, but it's good to know what to do. You can also have a gradient on the outline. So for example, let me switch back to black-white. If I come in here and I'm saying, okay, now I don't want to have my fill, I'm going to switch to my outline, you can add a gradient onto that. And to add it, all you have to do is make sure that thing is in the front and then click on this little thumbnail, and it adds a gradient onto here, and then you can go in and edit your gradient yourself there as well. So I want a pink to, I don't know, purple gradient outline. And you're like, okay, it's kind of hard to see in there. So if you ever want to even notice it, it's probably a good idea to come into your stroke panel and just turn up how fat it is. That will allow you to at least, you can kind of see, oh, okay, it is a pink to purple gradient on my outline, okay? You may use that sometimes. Usually, though, you just put the gradient on the fill-in color, okay? And so take a second, and I want you to just try out some of those things if you haven't already been trying them out as I've been going. Make sure that you understand kind of how all those tools work, because you're going to need to use the direction tool. Oh, this is another thing that's important. So with the gradient direction tool, when you have this, if you're selected on the outline color, it's going to say no. It gives you that little symbol that says you cannot control it. That's because on the outline, you can't control which direction the gradient goes using the gradient tool. It doesn't work. So if you're trying to change your direction and it's not working, just switch back to your fill-in color, and then you should be able to kind of go ahead and do it again, okay? So give these things a try. When you feel pretty good about it, go ahead and move on to the emoji assignment.